Okay, so first of all, I'm going to clarify the several points in the model. So under status quo, that not all schools are forced to provide this education regarding the problem of food production or meat production, etc. It's up to the maybe each teacher or each school, etc. We are going to enforce the all school and teachers to teach, and the process is going to like this. So as Infoscience said, that we are going to enforce all children to involve in the breeding process, or maybe pigs or chickens or whatever, and they are going to experience how to raise those kind of animals. And these animals are going to be sent to the slaughter house, and they are going to be slaughtered. And maybe it's optional for this, each children to see how slaughter is going on, or maybe some children maybe take the option to go to a movie, etc. And lastly, after this animal become the actual meat product, this is going to send back to the school, and every children are going to see and understand that this was actually maybe pigs or chicken which we raised, etc. And with these processes, we are also going to combine such verbal explanation or textbook education regarding the problem of the food production or food consumption, etc. Maybe, for example, this is about the moral problem of the animal sacrifice, or maybe this is about the food waste or food shortage, etc. Right? And also actual verbal education is going to also conducted combined with these processes. And we think it's reasonable to assume that the age of the children is going to be maybe 12 or 13, or maybe the middle school, or end of the primary school. We think it's reasonable age to teach a bit complicated social issues. So based on that, I'm talking about two issues. Firstly, the why in order to let children understand and think about the food problems regarding food production and consumption, why this particular way is necessary. Secondly, I'm talking about the role of the compulsory education to inform that important social issues as well as compulsory education, the first issue. So we have to recognize that in the status quo, that the children or the majority of the general public do not recognize that how the food or meat are going to produce, and how it is burdensome or consume a lot of crops, etc. Right? They don't understand how to produce it, and they don't understand how that is burdensome, etc. Right? You don't usually see in the daily lives that how the pigs and chicken breed in the breeding houses, or how these people these animals the squirrel, etc. are raised. So we think as a result that they do not actually understand how food is precious, or how food consumes a lot of money or a lot of resources, etc. We think this produces a several problem. Firstly, also we are already actually seeing the food waste problem especially in the advanced nation, right? A lot of people actually, even though they buy a lot of food or buy a large cup of ramen or etc., they actually remain and they don't eat all of them. That's also something is casually occurring, and that food is wasted. We think it's hugely problematic, right? Also, the wasted food can have it save the people who are starving, people who are poor. If those kind of food are imported food, maybe that can be used to save the starving people in the developing nation, etc. Basically, the food waste is important, obviously, a huge social issue in our society. But furthermore, we think that that these individuals do not recognize that we are actually sacrificing the animal on the ground. We think. Even though the meat production actually sacrifices the animals, even though given that the average student or the general public do not usually see and think about how the animals are raised or how these animals are sacrificed, we think they don't actually understand. They actually without understanding they're consuming a meat, or without understanding that the moral dilemma of the sacrificing the animal they're going to be consuming. And we think it's a problem. But we think this is going to be solved under our model, right? Actually, under our model, later is that children are going to raise or breed. They are involved in the breeding process of the meat production, they are going to, for example, feed the pigs or the chickens. They are going to understand that how much crops is going to be used, or like how it is balanced somewhat, or maybe that how it takes time and hours to raise those kind of animals, etc. They are going to think that food like meat we are going to consume on a daily basis is precious, and that should be, should not be like wasted, etc. Later. So we think it's like it is important, right? Because firstly, that the food waste are going to be comparatively likely so under harmful, right? People are going to actually recognize that the food production is somehow like burdensome and takes a lot of time and consumes a lot of crops, and as a result, we think that the individual are more likely to think and actually understand that food is precious and we shouldn't waste it, etc. And also in terms of the animal sacrifice, we're not saying that all of the children are going to be suddenly like vegetarian. We are not saying that all should be like vegetarian, etc. But actually, they are going to understand. They are actually sacrificing animal. They are actually like combined or involved with the moral dilemma or moral problem of the sacrificing animal. Basically, knowing about those important issues is very important.
If you want to save the poor and developing nations or animals in general, why don't you force these students to see the brutal scenery of how these animals are slaughtered in this education?
Okay, so we think that ultimate goal is not like completely solve the actual social problem, but we think that as a part of society, we think that each individual has the obligation to be informed information regarding the important social issues. This is nice introduction to my second issue about the role of the compulsory education. So we think that compulsory education has a role to inform the certain like important social agenda, which might like things like that might be relevant to you, or things that might like influence a lot of like people that study, right? Because the education also has to create the certain like important functional member of the study. We think that each individual knowing that those sort of important social issue is very important, and we think we do recognize some people feel that discomfort, or some people feel that a bit of the kind of trauma or like the animals who are raised by your hand are going to be sacrificed. But we think that sort of like temporary harm doesn't outweigh the social actual benefit of the informing and making them understanding those sort of important social issues, right? And we are already doing it. For example, things like historical education, like we are letting the children to go to the museum, showing the picture of the victim of the atomic bomb, or how the bomb is atrocious, etc. Right? Those sort of education will be conducted in order to inform and think about those sort of important social agenda in the study. So what we see that it's like food production or meat production is like huge important social agenda, and that all of us, or many, or at least majority of our society are going to be involved. We think that it's quite important for the compulsory education system to inform and they understand how those systems are going on, the problem regarding with the proposals.
For his remarks, I'd like to call upon the leader of the opposition to open up the case for side opposition within 7 minutes. Hear, hear.
You're a 7-year-old kid that has just entered elementary school. You receive on the 15th of April tiny, cute little piggy. You feed him, you water him every day seamlessly, and when he becomes sick, you treat him with your full hand, and when he seems uncomfortable in his little nice house, you remake it or repair it for him. Summer, autumn, winter, and now it's February. The day has come. You have to take your little piggy to a truck just to take him to be slaughtered and made into pieces, and you have to consume that little piggy that you liked. We think this is wrong. We think igniting the very visceral reaction through traumatic experience to use them as a tool to solve social problem is something that is intolerable, especially when this is a controversial issue that government must not take a specific stance for, and therefore we're very proud to oppose. let's make this debate clear, right? We think we're okay with providing facts or statistics about how many animals are dying, how many animals are being consumed per year. We think that's something that we can support. What we are opposing specifically is the visceral education that ignites the very visceral reaction by children, like pressing and forcibly, forcing these children to abide by the kind of ideology that they want to support. And also, we don't think this is a debate about whether or not animal rights or protection of animals to some extent is important. We concede to some extent that needs to be taken into consideration. But this debate is really about what education should look like and how it should be in relation with controversial issue that we have in the state, in our society. So I'm going to talk about two things in this debate. One, what should moral education look like in the first instance? Two, under their paradigm, assuming their model, why their proposal does not really help or contribute to the kind of things that they want to solve. So on the first issue, what should moral education look like in a fundamental sense? The first thing that we have to notice here, and we think the government side would agree with me, we think consumption of meat is a controversial issue. We don't think it's a moral bad. We think there's still debates going on about whether or not that is a good thing or that is a bad thing. If only because consumption of meat is something that comes within your natural desire. You have to eat meat even in the if you're living in the nature, that sort of thing. We don't think it's a moral bad. We think that's something that human beings have fundamental right to. And we think the kinds of moral education that they're standing by forces children to believe that eating animals, like slaughtering animals for the sake of their consumption, is something that is bad through use of visceral image and continuously telling the child that this is something that is immoral, is something that you should not be doing in your future life. I think this is something that is fundamentally in favor of protection of animal rights. And we think this is problematic when we regard the meaning of education itself, because we think education is something that provides the grounds for each individual so that they can actually think and decide on their own. And this is precisely important when we're talking about issues that are controversial, because you have a broad spectrum of people in our society. Some people believe that animal rights must be protected. Others in the society do not believe in the same way. They think that animal can be sacrificed for the sake of consumption. And taking a specific stance on this means you're disregarding, no thank you, other individuals in our society. You're disregarding other spectrum of people that exist in our society. We think that's not something that a democratic form of education should be standing for. We obviously don't want people to stand for liberal ideas only in education because they think liberal idea is good. We think we should always stand for conservative ideas as well, and we think that's something that's not no thank you. We think that's something that education should seek for. That's the precise reason why we don't take a specific stance on, for instance, abortion that is controversial in the status quo. We provide the good parts about abortion as well as bad parts about abortion, and let children think on their own, because that's a controversial issue we have in our society. We think the same thing goes for religion, for instance, or the concept of self-defense, for instance. That's something that's done under the status quo. No, thank you. The second issue here is that we think visceral reaction should never be used in education or in any circumstances, right? Because for the simple reason, because you don't want children to be forced to undergo traumatic experiences through being made to see grotesque images of animals suffering, as I've said in my introduction. We think this is precisely the reason why we don't force children, no thank you, to see images of rape, for instance, just because of the fact that raping other individuals is bad. That's a consensus we have in our society. Yet we don't do that because we don't want children to be forced to go under traumatic experiences that will remain in their mind for the rest of their life. We don't think that's something we do. The same thing goes for abortion. We don't make child to see a visceral image of how through abortion babies are suffering in mother's womb, that sort of thing. We don't think that's something that's allowed in the status quo. And this is precisely important because you're made to kill animals that you have had affection for the past year. For instance, if you're raising a pig or chicken, right? I think it's something that sacrifices your affection for the animal. I think that's something bad because it's similar to being made to kill your pet, for instance, your dog. That's something that you wouldn't want to do under the status quo. That's something that is a traumatic experience for these individuals, and you cannot make these individuals go under that circumstance, that experience. And yes.
our education is value neutral because we tell children it's controversial, as Prime Minister said that, and we actually kill animals. What's wrong with that?
Yes, on the surface, it's neutral. But when you're made to kill animal and in a visceral way, and you're made to think and confront the very visceral thing that's happening in front of you, we don't think that's neutral anymore, and that's why we're opposed, right? But secondly, we think that proposal under that paradigm isn't really effective at all at the end of the day. Because first thing here is that when you're killing animals every year, for instance, you get used to it, right? This is the same reason that child soldier, when they're used to kill for other individuals in a society, they do not think that they cannot think anymore in a rational sense that killing another human being is bad. The same thing will happen under that paradigm. Because children would get used to this thing, they'll think this is easy, after all, it isn't really bad. But secondly, we think this only works for a specific animal that they're made to kill, their children. Because the reason why they oppose the action itself is because they have affection to a particular animal. We don't think this spreads to other animals that exist in our society because you don't really have a sense of affection if you see a random cat being run over by a truck, for instance, in a random road. We don't think that's something that they can expect under their paradigm. We think this is a wrong form of education. That's as simple as that. We're opposed.
I thank the leader of the opposition for his remarks. Now I'd like to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue their case within 7 minutes. Here.
They say it's your choice to not care about animal rights. Yes, but it's not your choice when you don't even know how, ducks are killed. It's your choice to not care when you know how foie gras are produced. It might be inhumane, but you don't care. It's okay to not care about third world problems, but it's only a choice when you know that all the crops and the animals that farmers produce don't go to the hands of the farmers themselves, but are contracted to go to the first world, and there's a huge disparity even in the country, but also between countries. That decision, that moral judgment in a democracy and as an individual is only possible when you are informed of it, when you have the gateway to understand an issue, and we think it's often the most shocking experience is what ignites you of that interest. That is why it is moral to inform you of the consequences of your choice. Your choice to infringe on animal rights, the question is a balance. That balance is only possible when you understand that and you participate in a democratic process, and that's what we want through education and democracy. I'll be talking about why education should inform citizens of social problems where they tend to keep ignorant. Before that, rebuttal. No sense. First, they say that it's a shocking experience and it's probably something you don't want. One, generally speaking, I don't think people will feel shocked by the fact that you produce a pig and it was turned into meat. I think that they are able to gradually overcome that experience. At least if they might feel shocked that they lost a pet or something like that, but are able to gradually accept it. It's not like this everlasting experience that they're deprived of it, because they are informed that there will be an educational process of this thing like that. We want that emotional procedure that they lost a loved one, or there's so much effort included in raising, and that it suddenly turns into meat and goes somewhere else. That procedure is important, so yes, it's a shock, that's not a problem. But if the shock is such an overriding one, that is a very minimal individual. Even in the status quo, if people are likely to vomit out of a traumatic process in the videos of grotesque images, we are okay for these people to step out. Because the benefit of people being able, the general amount of people being able to participate in the process and learn by it is achieved, but also who step out. The people who stepped out of it also understand how shocking the experience is, and that's why they stepped out. So they already are informed of an emotional procedure and the consequence of the choices already. So this bit of unfortunate people on the ground is a minor issue, is at least a procedural issue in the form of the question of implementing compulsory education. So, and they also tell us that, we're imposing values. Ali's already said numerous times, no. It's that in order to make judgments as individuals, you need to know about that issue. If you don't know it, that is not a valid judgment at all. The problem is that animal rights is a controversial issue. Where we draw the balance, what is animal welfare in the first place, are Sashimi, some people even think that sashimis are swimming in the sea. That's a level of ignorance that might exist. The thing is that these people dilute the democratic process. If 30% are ignorant, other 70% judgments are also lost. But also because it's so controversial and it's up to people's preference, we want the maximum amount of people participating in that discussion for a best decision possible in a democratic system. That's why informing is necessary. We want less ignorant people. The only best way to inform people is a shocking experience. Sure.
The clothes you're wearing was most likely produced in a sweatshop in some country within the developing nation. Does that make your choice to wear that clothes right now an immoral choice?
Could you say that again?
Your clothing was most likely made in a country where people are being subjugated in being able to make that, right? So does that make your choice invalid?
Once again, it is important to inform that choice, and it's ultimately up to people's decision to say it is important, we should tackle social problems or not care about it. So it might be that this education is a gateway to also care about those issues. We're okay with having more information about this thing. It's not about whether it's good or not, we want people to know about it, so don't care. So, no thanks. Why about education? So, what you're ignorant of, you simply cannot think about it. If you don't know about it, you have no first step to even know about the issue because you don't know how to search about it, or probably you have in your own echo chamber of friends who don't really care about animal rights, so you don't have that discussion. No, thank you. But also, if you simply don't know it, you can't even discuss about it because you don't know the premises that people care about animal rights so much. If they don't understand why animals suffer so much of a procedure, like, why do you even care? But also, if you don't know, you don't understand why people are advocating for it. If you don't know how animals are produced, you have no understanding or you make no sense why people are so angry about animals treated in a terrible way or why people so care about it so much. That means that simply because you do not have the first opportunity to know about it, people are barriered from any form of legislative participation, or rather think that it's something a crazy, weird people doing it and ostracized or simply blocked or barriered or make themselves opt out of that participation. And why education, doing it beforehand for everyone, is so beneficial. Because it's a loss for democracy, as we told you, if people are not able to discuss it, because it dilutes it and it harms the fact that these moral decisions, controversial decisions, should be made by people on the ground in our society. But also, education's role is to change perspective society. So we know it's shocking, but what about, say, education about war? Children think generally that it's a fun and an enjoyable thing. We shock them, change their perspective by visiting grotesque videos or visiting the atomic bomb dome. That is a terrible thing, including tragedies and perspectives that is hugely shocking for you. That is about, it is a shock, but it's important we change the perspective. You might respect your country or grandfathers, but telling them that they are complicit in war crimes or atrocities will probably be a very shocking experience for these people, but it's important for them to be able to participate in discussions of wars and balances of human rights. Because we don't know what people will ultimately decide about, but ultimately that decision would only be valid when they have the opportunity to know about the issue and are able to think about it, which is premised on that shocking experience. Understanding as much as possible the weight of the consequences of the procedure are relevant to it. No, thank you. Because in animal rights, is that some people think that it's just something you eat as a food. It's that something machines suddenly change it into a meat. Or it's a really cheap thing, or just happens that it exists and farmers get all the crops and things like that. All these things that I've just said are wrong. Farmers don't get it. It's a costly procedure. It's something that includes numerous atrocities. If you imagine that they're animals and can feel pain. That means that all that information, understanding is only possible when you try to make them exposed to that environment. And words don't tell them how it's important. Because animals are ultimately different things. We see them as foods on the plate or different things. So we have a barrier that they're animals, where they're different things often, unfortunately, in society. We are only able to break that barrier by trying to make the proximity with these livestock as much as possible. Try to say that they might be similar to you. Try to feel that they might have emotion. We might attach sympathy. That process makes it only possible for us to break that barrier of food versus us and say that they might have rights and I might care. It might lead to more animal welfare, but that is not the point. The point is that we now understand the controversial issue and are able to participate in legitimate and important democratic discussion, and that is probably what education is about.
Prime Minister, for his remarks, I'd like to call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to continue their case within 7 minutes. Hear, hear.
when I first saw the motion, the thing that I thought was that this debate was a discussion about moral, right? Because the word says moral meet education, not meet education, right? Because that's the thing we can actually have in status quo. The fact that when you are talking only about like asymmetry of information under your side of the house, I think is a very lazy way to characterize a problem. Because if you look at reality, there are multitudes of ways for individuals to be able to be informed of the transgressions that the animals are actually facing within status quo. But the question and the burden under your side of the house was to defend a moral truth that says it is bad for individuals to over excessively consume animals or to even like mistreat them and whatnot. You guys had to argue for that, obviously, and you guys were being so lazy to the extent that you were just saying that, oh no, the only problem we have is information asymmetry, right? So let's look at several problems within this debate. Number one, let's look at what they were doing under their side of the house, right? They said that there are several problems that we experience in status quo. Number one, that there was an information asymmetry. Number two, there's individuals starving and whatnot, right? So let's look at how we get to tackle with that under our side of the house, because these are problems brought up by their prime minister. So when they first said that there are individuals who do not have information in status quo, and like in the ways that things like, for example, factory farming, for example, are happening, then isn't it possible even under our side of the house when you are providing information to individuals, when you're telling them about how the conditions of animals are within, for example, the factories that like put chickens in small boxes and over excessively force them to lay eggs and whatnot, is already enough, because individuals are able to understand that those are things that are bad because you're literally limiting their autonomy, but moreover you're forcing them to stay in one position forever. And honestly, if you're going into school and you're sitting in front of like the desk, no thank you, for more than 6 hours a day, you would obviously understand that as well. So we think that's not mutually exclusive. People can understand that with the intersectionality of the pain that you get to actually feel on the similarity itself. So we don't really think that's a non-issue in today's debate. But if that was their goal, then they're not fully justifying the motion, right? Because the motion was talking about the very visceralness of that image and talking about why you have to enforce them and blackmail them emotionally in that extent. We think that was a burden that they needed to prove in today's debate that they chose to ignore. Then the next thing they talked about was starving people in developing countries, whatnot, right? There are several reasons why this was problematic under their side of the house. First is because you do not solve that problem fundamentally, even under their side of the house. They did not talk about the mechanism of redistribution of that food even to people anyways, right? Moreover, assuming that that was true and like reallocation would actually happen, that contradicts the very purpose of the proposal, because the motion requires you to talk about why this was morally bad, and you're now saying that it's okay for them to be redistributed to other individuals for them to consume. So it just doesn't make sense. Well, what's your stance? But moreover, we say that no thank you. If your proposal was so effective to the extent that people would actually start believing this, then wouldn't it be the rationale of individuals now in status quo not provide that food to people in the third world, right? So then they'd obviously be starving on your side of the house. So we don't really think that your proposal actually solves that from the start, right? Then their deputy started talking about choice, and that your choice is only validated in the instance that you actually have information, right? Firstly, we said that's not mutually exclusive. You can achieve that under our side of the house as well. But moreover, we say is that it's not even true, right? Like if you're talking about individuals not having information, that the question then becomes about responsibility. Where's the individual, the one proactively ignoring their choices from the start, right? Obviously, it was the government who was not providing that choice, because the government also understands that if they were to provide that choice from you, you would stop consuming meat to that extent. You would feel morally harassed and whatnot. Moreover, we say is that if you're morally harassing individuals to opt into a choice, it's not even choice from the start, right? Because you guys were arguing for a democratic choice, but you guys were saying that no, it's okay to actually abuse these individuals, make them feel bad for like consuming meat, make them feel bad for like bringing this pig to the slaughtering house, and then thinking that was actually a thing that they should actually feel bad for about, right? Under your side of the house, that choice is not actually achieved because you're just morally blackmailing individuals to opt into a different choice. We think that's much more immoral. Then, so what are the two things that I have to argue now that they shifted their stance from first speaker? Firstly, I want to talk about why we shouldn't use children as social battering rams for a social good. The next thing that I want to talk about is why under your side of the house they do not achieve their goal because of the animal activists radicalizing, and the nuance of why radicalization is actually harmful for the progression of that movement and how you're going to address that movement. Yes?
So it's teaching the atrocity of war, harassing people to think about war in a certain way, or not just simply joining in.
It's harassing people if you force them to go into war, right? That's the distinction we're talking about, right? Like you're not forcing children to become child soldiers in status quo for them to be able to experience that war is something that is bad, right? You don't force children, for example, to have sex with each other in order for them to understand what is proper sexual intercourse, right? You don't force children to bully each other in order for them to be able to understand why bullying is bad, right? So you don't get where you're deriving that mechanism and that legitimacy. So like obviously you guys have to argue for that. Like come on. So social bantering, right? Let's talk about why this is a moral ban in our society, right? Because this assumes two things. Number one, it assumes that there is ownership of that children and their ability to be able to make rational decision-making process within the status quo. The fact that our society does not exist to constrain you into the ideology that exists within our society, and the fact that our society exists to allow you to be able to emancipate your own rights, and to be able to have understandings of what is morally wrong and what is morally right, is the reason why this is something that should not happen from the start. Precisely because of the fact that we have our society in order to allow individuals to be able to experience several different things within our society and to be able to judge what is actually morally good for their lives in order to enhance themselves in the near future, right? So the existence of our society does not exist in a vacuum that says we should limit your choice because this is something that we think that is good, right? It exists for allowing that individual to be able to emancipate themselves in the near future. So we don't just think that it's okay for society to be able to enforce that moralness that they're talking about. But the reason why it's okay for society to enforce things like moral education, sit down, the moral education says you should not kill individuals within our society, is because life is the very foundation of an individual in being able to emancipate rights. It's the very basis of individuals being able to exist. So that's where we draw the line, right? It's okay for you to teach something whether or not something is moral, based on whether or not that's a necessity of the human individual on that extent. So to this extent, you say that it's not really a human necessity, therefore it's not something that you should be calling moral from the start, right? So that's the difference, right? The next, very simply, let's talk about the radicalization of animal activists in status quo. Look, now the fact that you're saying as a state, it's okay for you to use visceral images, it's going to be a bad thing. Why? Let's look at what PETA is doing in status quo, right? When PETA started noticing that there are ways of being able to enforce people to believe in their cause, what they started doing was they started actually using actual human beings and put them into like meat packages and like distributed them like on the streets, saying that look, this is what's happening to animals and this is a really bad thing, right? You know what that did to individuals? That freaked people out. It made them not want to listen to that movement anymore. It made them want to shun away from that very education. So what is the most likely scenario of that side of the house? It's most likely going to be individuals not wanting to take that education seriously. It's most likely going to be individuals calling in sick in the days that you have to have meat education day, right? So they're not going to want to participate in that anymore because of the visceral shocks and most likely because of the blackmailing that you're going to be having from your teachers, right? So your education becomes ineffective to the extent that people will even actually stop listening and people would even actually stop thinking of why these issues are so important and why these issues are something that we need to be able to forward within our society, right? At the end of my speech, you can examine two things. Number one, they do not achieve their goal, but number two, they're morally bankrupt.
I'd like to thank the Leader of Opposition for his remarks. I'd like to call upon the government whip to summarize the speech in 7 minutes. Here.
The function of education is to inform and rationalize citizens. It's not limited to pragmatic skills like mathematics or literacy. It's also about social problems and now in the future, and also about controversial morality and ethics. Yes, it's very hard time for children. They have to spend hours a day on studying multiple subjects. They face with questions which even academic professors don't have answers yet. They have to know like shocking reality in the world with vivid image of warfare or poverty, which we are doing in the status quo. But they agreed from Leader of Opposition, we should inform children of animal rights or waste of food programs. Then this debate is about which side's way of education is better way or proper way of informing citizens, given that they have already agreed this, we have to inform children of animal rights and food-based program. Madam Chair. Deputy Leader of Opposition distorted the motion in info slide and said we have to prove education should nudge children to think in a particular moral direction, but it's not like motion's requirement. Maybe you know the story of Pigeon, right? Which is about the elementary school children have actually raised up pigs and they ate those kind of meats in the past. But yes, children are shocked with that experiences. But most of children are continuing to eat meats, even though they had shocked sometimes. But they question morality. They thought they prioritize to eat and continue to eat pigs and meats. That is actually happening in those kind of moral meat education. They exaggerate our education like like making every single student involved in this type of experience to run away from those kind of like eating meats and going to be animal rights radicalists. But it's not true, right? It's just knowing what is reality and what is the sacrifice instead of like when you are eating animals. That is the thing we are doing on the side of the house. So from government web, I want to talk about two issues in my speech. First of all, pragmatic consequences. What is the reaction of children and how children is going to change their behaviors? And secondly, it's more important question about as states, why we have to like introduce moral media education from a perspective of the function of education. So firstly, pragmatic consequences. Manager, when you eat meat, what do you sacrifice? It's life of like living animals. It's piles of crops which could be eaten by other people, which will be the fault of farmers. Those kind of things are sacrificed when you eat meat. All of this should be taken into consideration, Mr. Madam Chair, because they already agreed upon the fact they have to know about what means when you eat animals. They analyzed our education is too radical, but it's not true. We raise our pigs, we send those kind of people, those kind of pigs to slaughterhouse, and we see what is the actual product of meat. That's the education of our side of the house. We don't say that. As the dictator of abortion talked to us, like we show the image of human is packaging to something like animal meat. Those kind of things is too radical as they explain. We are not doing that. We just raising up pigs and we sometimes eat those kind of meats. That's our education. We don't think the children are too shocked to continue to eat meats in outside our house.
Sure.
That's the pragmatic consequences we told you. Then how it is better? Because we told you that animal rights issues and food waste problems are very ignored in the status quo. Even they didn't talk about those kind of issues. Even they recognize those issues in the status quo because they are daily consuming those kind of eats. They think it's very natural. They take it for granted. That is the status quo. That's why to make balance more fair for animal rights or food waste problem, we take this policy. That's pragmatic consequences. That will be fair in outside of the house. Moving on to the second point, but before that, yes.
Your Deputy Prime Minister said that your ability to be able to achieve your benefits was when people are shocked to the extent that you're actually scared of it. Now you're saying people aren't that shocked to that extent. Which is it? Please make a commitment.
Please be realistic. Maybe you are very shocked and you're scared of eating meat in that lunchtime. But when it comes to next day, maybe you restart to eat meat. It is actually happening in elementary school education. Because you are too shocked at that time, it doesn't mean you continue to be shocked and scared of eating meat. Which we think is more realistic analysis coming from Prime Minister. We take that point. So secondly, principal analysis. We told that from the leader of opposition, they told us education shouldn't impose certain values by visceral experiences. But first of all, we told you from Prime Minister it's value neutral, right? From Deputy Prime Minister also we told you how we tell how animal rights exist, but we kill animals and we enjoy those kind of experiences. It's also important perspective. We told you how education can be value neutral in our side of the house, and also about viscerality that is coming from the leader of opposition. We have to discuss moral issues in this issue, right? In which we have to talk with our own morality as to whether you can prioritize well-beings for human beings over animal rights or animal rights. It's not that choice if you know how delicious meats are, but if you don't know how meats are created and what kind of life from animals means, right? We think when you don't know about what is happening in the consumption of meat and you know how delicious meats are, we think it's not the legitimate choice for children and the citizen to decide whether or not we should continue to eat meat or whether or not we should waste the food, for example. Madam Chair, from Deputy Prime Minister, we told you it's very difficult to make children think about the animal rights thing, about meat, because we already take it for granted from childhood. You have continued to eat meat. You have continued to enjoy those delicious foods in their side of the house. That's why we have to make children shocked to the extent they are shocked or they are scared of eating meat to some extent at that moment. But we don't think they have exaggerated too much. It's not it's unreasonable. And they try to show our education is very radical to the extent sending children to war or making children sex each other. We think it's very different, right? When you sex with people you don't like, it's very traumatic. Far out compared to raising up pigs, raising up cows, it's very different. very reasonably. And even if our policy is a bit biased to some directions of like animal rights, for example, they didn't tell us how it is bad. Because they already agreed upon that animal rights is important sometimes, and they already agreed that food waste problem is problematic. Then they narrowed down the legitimate moral education only about killing human beings or war education. But we already told you there are various types of moral education. For example, you have to respect each other, even though it's not necessary to live as human beings. For example, you are going to like a nuclear bomb museum, even though it's not related to your daily life. For example, it's not killing human beings, even though you don't go to atomic bomb museum. But we are doing that because sometimes it's very difficult for children to know about the reality. It's not children to know about the moral dilemma, for example. That's why at least we inform children of what is the reality and what should be the necessary information before you make choice. That is the case coming from government bench. For that reason, I'm very proud.
I thank the governor whip for his remarks. Now I call upon the opposition whip to summarize their case within 7 minutes. Hear, hear.
To be honest, I don't get what they want to achieve, right? He doesn't say, well, children will forget the experiences he or she gained in this education just after finishing a lunch. Then that children will continue to be ignorant of other animal issues continuously, and he or she will continue to believe that sashimi is actually fish as it is, right? Their case is contingent on the fact that there are so many children, at least a certain proportion of children, who will be necessarily shocked and traumatized, right? Deputy Prime Minister said, you can overcome this trauma, so that's not a problem. But they didn't tell us the reason why forcing trauma in the first place is justifiable, right, to the children. They didn't willing to tell us the reason why forcing that trauma to the children and using that children's social battering up is acceptable. For example, some women can maybe overcome the experiences of sexual assault. It's not a reason to say that we should legalize sexual assault on women. That's morally bankrupt. Several issues. First of all, the ignorance of children. Second of all, even if children are ignorant of animal issues, why this motion is simply immoral and morally bankrupt from the perspective of moral education. First of all, onto the idea of how children are ignorant in the status quo. Deputy Prime Minister said that children are so ignorant to the extent that they believe that sashimi is a fish, that sort of thing. Well, let's look at your note, right? Deputy Prime Minister talked about the harm of scenario what if children are ignorant, right? They're not willing to tell us the reason why the liberal society, children are so kept apart from these courses and awareness campaign of this animal right. But two, I think government was kind of lazy because they didn't engage with the rebuttal coming from DLO because we have continuously talked to that's the argument for providing statistics and factual information and words to these children. That's more neutral and non-damaging way of education. They need to engage and they didn't do so. No. But furthermore, the example of sashimi, right? Sashimi, right? Well, but that's actually fake news and that's factually incorrect. That's the first thing. But let's consider the best scenario, right? Let's assume that there are some children who are so ignorant of these animal issues, despite the fact oftentimes social media to cover this animal rights issue, maybe these children are so politically apathetic, right? That children will not, anyway, not go to vote, will not participate in the democratic process. I don't understand what's the harm to democracy. But furthermore, even we assume the children are so ignorant, right? The first thing I want to ask here is that, like, what's the harm, right? So what, right? Then what? I want to know why that's something morally bad thing. But most importantly, they need to tell us why this ignorance, providing education, neutral information, enlightenment is a justification for using children as a social battering ram. And that's the point which they're missing in this debate. So why this is true? Because, for example, For example, when I was tortured, I didn't appreciate the moral cost and pain of being tortured, right? We don't force children to be tortured each other. No, thank you. No. For example, when you participate in the war, you can actually appreciate the full horror of the war. You can experience it, right? Deputy Prime Minister and Prime Minister are saying that it's very important that children face the consequence of their choices. If that is true, they should force children to see the brutal imagery of the slaughtering these animals and let these children to, for example, stop so that they can appreciate the suffering of the starving people in developing country. We don't do so. But furthermore, Prime Minister said it's okay for children not to see the brutal imagery of the slaughter. Deputy Prime Minister said it's okay for children to opt out from that classroom, right? It means that provision of information, neutral information, is less important than psychological well-being and welfare of these children. That's significant concession as well as inconsistency starts from that side of the house. But more importantly, the analogy coming from government side was historical education. First of all, we oppose using graphic imagery, for example, of how women was raped in Korea, for example, during World War II. We don't want to use graphic imagery of genocide, right? We don't necessarily support that analogy. That's why their examples are at the best value neutral. But furthermore, even historical education, using, for example, graphic imagery in historical education is justified. There is a still distinction between seeing brutal imageries and experiencing, reproducing that brutality armchair, right? For example, because what they're going to do is not providing imagery of how animals are suffering or how poor people are suffering in developing country. They're going to force this these children to actually reproduce this brutality armchair. That's the distinction. That's the reason why we don't necessarily get traumatized when we see brutal imagery, but many soldiers participating in warfare, for example, necessarily have PTSD. Why? Because they have necessarily a sense of guilt forever. The fact that they killed civilians, the fact that they killed opponents necessarily haunt that person's forever until that person's life. Yes, we can see some people can overcome this trauma, but as I said in my introduction, it's not a reason to enforce trauma. Even if that trauma can be recovered in the future, current children, at that point, they suffer, and that's a harm which they have never justified in this debate. Comparison. Deputy Prime Minister conceded that it's not the responsibility of children to care about the poor developing country, care about animals' welfare. Then why we have to care about other people, right? Why we have to do this in the first place is states have moral obligation to protect human beings, that's the first thing, but you have first obligation to protect its citizens, right? Over foreign countries' citizens. I don't care about it. But furthermore, Deputy Sure.
You're just asserting it's bad to impose morality. Then please explain how our education in particular is too traumatic to overcome to extend moral education, moral decision of individual with this student.
Because that's the premise of the case, right? So, but if the Prime Minister legal opposition have already talked to you, right? Why these students are not responsible for the fact some multinational corporation are exploiting or wasting some of the food, right? Why I, as a children, as 12 years old children, have to be traumatized to save some other issues in developing country, right? Because that's a fault of, for example, the state. But furthermore, they have been quite ignorant of the fact that animal activism has been extremely popular in many countries, like say New Zealand, Australia, for example, right? There are constantly activists who do things like boycott to, for example, try to criticize corporation could do, for example, waste the food. But furthermore, all the benefits that they talk to you, for example, are extremely speculative harm, a speculative benefit. They have never substantiated, they have never elaborated. Government people are not actually trying to engage with our analysis from DLO as to how this is going to radicalize animal rights movement and therefore counterproductive. Whereas in the process of this education, trauma necessarily, definitively happen. That's the harm which they should have justified, which they have never done so. Abolished.
I thank the opposition for his remarks. I'd like to call upon the opposition to reply to conclude their case within 4 minutes. Hear, hear.
I had to neutralize my dog before because of the fact that he had a broken back and we could not fix him and he could not walk anymore and he was suffering. Let me tell you what I experienced back then. Obviously, it wasn't just a walk in the park. It was something way more than that. It felt like I had to bring my dog into the gas chambers of Auschwitz. I had to send my dog dying, right? And that allowed me and not allowed me, more like forced me to cry for like several days because I could not do anything and I felt really, 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 really bad, right? The thing is, given this example, what you can see here is that I'm not being informed of why it was bad. I just feel like, I just feel it's bad because of the consequences and because of the emotional feelings that I actually have. Innately, I do not understand why it was bad from the start to kill an animal that way. I do not understand what kind of like conversation I should have with other individuals other than an emotional, visceral feeling that I have that is actually hard to transcend and convince people to that extent. We think that the best goal that government was trying to achieve in today's debate cannot be achieved in the sense when we're talking about a visceral emotion that does not explain to them why something is immoral from the start. So let's look at two issues. Let's look at two issues in today's debate. Firstly, the nature of choice, and secondly, how to deal with information asymmetry, right? If all of this I can prove to you that goes to opposition, we win this debate. So firstly, let's talk about the nature of choice. There are two clashes with nature of choice. First is that we said that when people are ignorant, it's not a choice. We said that if it's blackmailing, it's also not a choice, which is more likely, right? And this is how we compare this thing, right? The thing with blackmailing individuals, like I've illustrated, is that the fact that individuals don't fundamentally understand why something is wrong. The fact that the only thing that individuals understand is that they're scared to do something, right? You tell them that if you do this, you're going to experience this traumatic thing again. You're going to go through this grief and regret. That is something that you should not experience anymore. And it just makes you want not to experience it anymore, right? Here's the thing, right? The case that they were talking about was that they're not even forcing everyone to opt into this. In fact, they're saying that it's optional to even go into the slaughterhouse, right? That is the reason why they're going to fall. It's because if their best case scenario was to talk about individuals not wanting to consume meat anymore, it's impossible technically under their side of the house because of the fact that you're allowing individuals to opt out of that very education and not see the most important part in which your case had its jugular in, right? So we don't really understand how then it goes to them. But moreover, engaging with the nature of choice, because that's what they wanted to talk about, right? The question in the ability to be able to inform individuals is that you need to ask the question, which was morally right? Just because on both sides, if you're talking about individuals being ignorant and you provide them information, they get informed. Assuming, but not conceding, that under their side of the house, you're able to give some information to individuals by blackmailing them, and they still get information, just assuming that, right? The question then becomes, which is morally right? And obviously it's providing them information because you're not harassing individuals, right? And we've given you a lot of examples from our side of the house in which we said that there are a multitude of ways to morally teach someone to be able to convince them that this is something that is wrong. We've talked about like giving books, like for example Peter Singer's books, like just make them read that in class, right? Like make a kindergarten version of it if you need it, right? So we don't think that's an issue. But moreover, we say is that it's actually much more better if you actually inform them with the statistics and you actually inform them in a neutral manner. It's because people can have a more moderate discussion about that and people would actually want to talk about it. So we have your benefit. Next, let's talk about information asymmetry, right? Here's a funny thing. They started talking about things like history and how we use visceral images sometimes. But the thing is, that's not analogous in any specific way. It's because you don't ride a time machine and go back in time to meet Hitler and to understand why what he did was bad, right? We don't go back in time and actually like watch the gas chambers of Auschwitz killing the Jews, right? So we don't really think that's analogous in today's debate. Moreover, we say is that information asymmetry, if we're able to prove to you that you can solve that by reading books, is possible, right? What's the testimony of that? If you look at every single debater in this room, we've probably read some form of article about like animal rights, right? And that was enough for us to understand the importance of it. In fact, that's the reason why we're having this debate right now. It's because we are able to understand that through reading books and through understanding individuals. But moreover, we say is that if individuals cannot understand that through reading books, then that is not a problem of being able to read that book. That is a problem of that individual's moral compass. So the problem goes to somewhere else because that person obviously does not have empathy to that extent. And then the question becomes, you just have to enhance the ability of individuals to have empathy, right? Because like, you know, the reason why we even have animal rights from the start is because we're empathetic human beings, so we can understand that. We can understand that without like literally forcing individuals to be harassed.
I thank the opposition reply for his remarks. The last but not least, I'd like to call for the government reply to conclude that case within 4 minutes. Here.
A lot of misrepresentation from opposition, but let's just break two of them. One, they say that, you know, if you pass, you forget, and totally the values are lost. No, the shock is relaxed. So you still remember that you were shocked. You still remember that it was an emotional moment for you. And you still remember the procedure of your loved one turning into a thing. So it's that you forget the shock and you don't have traumatic feelings always, but you're okay. That's why Mark probably is able to overcome the experience of losing his dog and is able to participate in the tournament. You remember it, but you just don't sort of forget it's just a misrepresentation. Second, they say that we have no harm. Well, sure we don't have harm because the issue that we're providing you is not the harm. It's that you need to be informed to have a very decent democratic participation. You need to be informed the maximum amount of people to not dilute the decision. You need to be informed to balance the rights of animal rights because your daily consumption is infringing on the rights that existed. It's infringing on the inconsistency of animal rights abuse, animal protection law, and the fact that we kill animals. It's an important question that we have to ask ourselves as a responsible citizen that this is built on that infringement of right, and that is only possible when you cast that doubt on people, and that is only possible outside the house. Two things. Firstly, what the hell is the harm of it? What the hell is the problem of this policy? What is the harm? Second, on why I'm serious about it. Their argument is trauma. Then they say that it would be wrong to make people try sex or try war. We know that it would be insane to do that. The question is, what's this education traumatic? All they're doing is, it's harmful. Tamura throws words like terrible, like abhorrent atrocities and sort of things like that. Or like, brutal. But don't tell us how it's brutal. I think government took a lot of time experiencing you. It is brutal to a certain extent, but reasonably brutal. And they never put how, their process is like this is analogous or equivalent to like trying war or trying sex. So why it's a so shocking experience on their side. They usually have unique explanation of why it's to that level. And if you don't have that, then they're just exaggerating things. But it also told you that if it's traumatic for some individual we can see, they can opt out, and they already have learned the lesson because it's shocking to them. They also had no rebuttal to that. And that's why we get the trauma to a certain extent, but it's not elaborated, relevant enough to the motion. Another idea is this immoral thing. It's immoral to teach people of something that is not required of their existence, something from DLO. The problem is that you say you also impose moral values or moral education that may not be necessary to you. Elo and Ockwith and even you talked about how you would probably opt into education of war, education of ethics, that for about foreigners and things like that. You probably would not go to war, but you teach that by words. They will tell us why images are problematic. You just said that something that is not related to existence is problematic, and probably that's an inconsistency and not making sense. But also, PETA, they do it anyway. Like, what's the harm of it? That was a very shallow, something talked about in 30 minutes. 30 seconds, I don't really buy that. Because the harm is really, minimal. What did it tell you from this time? We told you that informing individuals is important for democracy. The ignorance is not just that this person doesn't really care about it. The fact that this person votes with that ignorance dilutes other relevant informed people who care about this opinion being passing laws. It's also about these people might think about it, very precious, important experience. We thought there's 3 reasons why these people would be barred from any participation if they don't know in the first place. Because they can't discuss about it. They think that people who are advocated are crazy and things like that. There's no response to that. And that's why informing was so important in democracy by the individuals themselves. And then they're like, words are enough, then why not we do it too? But also they missed the response talking about how, treat animals as food. We are barriers from sympathizing with them with our daily activities and consumption. The only possible way to break that barrier would try to make them proximate to us, try to make me feel that they also have emotions too, try to sympathize with them. That experience is only breakable when this sort of physical interaction is possible. We told you the analysis from DPM, they missed that. That's why often words are insufficient. But we're not all debaters. Some people don't know about it, and some people might think about it as important. That's why it's more compulsory education. It's providing everyone in the situation that they might not know it. And that is so important for education democracy, not about practical consequences.